كيف يقارب الغرب السياسة الشرق أوسطية؟ وهل أضحى كل مسلم إسلامه سياسي؟ وماذا عن الإسلام والتسميات التي ألحقت به وفرضت عليه؟ الإسلام السياسي من الداخل. معكم زينب الصفار، تابعونا. هو 11 من أيلول سبتمبر 2001، تاريخ فرض مصطلحات وملحقات جديدة بالإسلام. فبتنا اليوم نسمع أكثر من الساسة والإعلاميين والخطباء والنشطاء والمحللين عن إسلام سياسي وإسلام جهادي وإسلام أصولي وإسلام راديكالي وإسلام سلفي وإسلام متطرف وإسلام مسلح والإسلاموفوبيا وغيرها. الفوضى التي تلت هذا التاريخ خلطت كل الأمور وأدت إلى الزج بالإسلام كدين سماوي في أتون الصراعات السياسية وانتشار بعض المفاهيم التي أضحت الخبز اليومي لبعض مراكز الأبحاث والمؤسسات الإعلامية الغربية على قاعدة التأثير السلبي لهذا النوع من الإسلام على المجتمع الغربي بكل مكوناته. أول مؤتمر عالمي عن الإسلام السياسي عقد في واشنطن في أيلول سبتمبر عام 1994 بعنوان خطر الإسلام الأصولي على شمال أفريقيا، حيث استخدم لأول مرة مصطلح ما يسمى الإسلام الأصولي لوصف ما يسمى اليوم الإسلام السياسي، وتدريجا استبدل هذا المصطلح بمصطلح الإسلاميون المتطرفون، واستقرت التسمية بحسب المراقبين بعد أحداث 11 من أيلول سبتمبر عام 2001 على الإسلام السياسي. ماذا تخبرنا الخبيرة بالاسلام السياسي والمستشارة لدى وزارة شؤون الاتحاد الاوروبي في تركيا، الأكاديمية والباحثة في جامعة بالكنت ومركز الأبحاث الاستراتيجية التركية الأستاذة عائشة سووزن، عن الاسلاموية والاسلام السياسي وتطور هذا المصطلح وعن استخداماته المشوشة. وأين هي تركيا اليوم من هذا الإسلام السياسي؟ وكيف يقارب الغرب السياسة الشرق أوسطية؟ ومن يزيد من سعير الخطاب السياسي الراديكالي؟ Dr. Aisha Suzanne, political scientist, academic, and expert in political Islam and counselor at the Ministry of EU Affairs. Welcome to The Inside. To start, ma'am, we want here a clear definition as an expert in political Islam. What is the definition of political Islam, and why is nowadays Islam affiliated with lots of other words that come part and parcel of Islam, as radical Islam, militant Islam, Islamists?
It is hardly possible to define Islamism according to Muslims because, as you mentioned, it takes time, some labels in front of Islam, like radical Islam, fundamentalist Islam, moderate Islam. But according to Muslims, this is against the very fundamental belief of Islam, which is Tawheed. Muslims believe in the unity of Islam in all sectors of life. Therefore, even in the countries like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Muslims prefer to define themselves solely as Muslim. But if we look at the roots of Islamism, we can go back to the 19th century. It is, we can say that it's a movement started in the land of Ottoman Empire against the rise of Western values, and it was an endeavor to combine the Western values and Muslim values, and endeavor to rescue the Caliph,
yes,
Caliph, and the leader of the Muslim society. So their first aim to protect the Khalif. It's better to consider political Islam or review political Islam from a vertical perspective rather than horizontal perspective.
Which
So
means?
we'd better to look at the generations. The first generation that we can define between 1850s and the beginning of the foundation of the Turkish Republic wanted to protect the Khalif and the Muslim state. But the second generation, we can say, started in the 1960s, were more interested in protecting Iman. So the first generation were more state-centered, but the second one more interested in Ummet, and they were they had more universal approaches. In Turkey, for instance, Islamist movements.
What are they
influenced
branded, the Islamist movements in Turkey? How are they looked at nowadays?
In the 60s, they were more, excuse me, at the beginning they were more nationalists. It is still nationalist in some sense, because according to Turkish Islamists, Turkey is the leader of the Muslim world, as a country with the Ottoman past, who led big Muslim landscape. But this nationalism declined in the 1960s with the influence of the translation movements. Many books translated into Turkish from Pakistan and Egypt, especially with the emergence of the Jamaat Islam and Muslim Brotherhood, and their leaders Ebu Ala and Mevdudi and Sayyid Qutb had been very effective in the configuration of Islamism in Turkey. In the 1990s, Islamists in Turkey put themselves in the shoes of socialists in Turkey, and they have seen themselves as the alternative to socialism. And for them, only Islam could have been alternative to the West. But simultaneously...
However, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Islam became the demon of the West.
Yes, the West attempted to define itself, but in order to define yourself, you need an encounter. So after the Soviet Union, Islam has become the encounter for the West. But simultaneously, there was the more harmony started between Islam and the Western values also.
This is where Turkey tried to station itself.
Yes.
Nowadays, where is Turkey when it comes to Islam stationed?
Turkey is...
And what type of political Islam do we have in Turkey, in your opinion, as an expert in such movements?
In Turkey, now we observe a transformation in terms of Islamist politics. Islamism is more liberal and democrat in Turkey. And it also would like to put itself as not as a model, but as a source of inspiration for the rest of Muslim countries. We observe this Arab Spring in Muslim geography, and this Arab Spring is defined as liberalization of.
Do you consider it a spring?
I do not. I do not.
Because, you know, the repercussions of it now, at the current moment in time, it shows that it's not a spring as it was branded at the beginning.
Yes, especially with the Syrian crisis, all Muslims have become more skeptic about the Arab Spring, I believe. When it started in Tunisia, we wanted to believe that it is the
revolution,
yes, revolution
of the century.
And something local. But with the Syrian crisis, we have lost our trust, I think.
Let me just hear, as an expert, as I said, and a counselor at the Ministry of EU Affairs, how does the West, what is the Western approach to Middle Eastern politics?
The West has always been colonialist towards the Middle East. For the West, Middle Eastern societies are a mass, can be led by the West. Modernization is a train, and Muslim societies are latecomers for this train, and they are the ones who should or have to jump into this train from their perspective.
Otherwise, they lose their seats.
Yeah, definitely. So they are always backward from a westernized. On the other hand, for Muslims, they want to become authentic. They would like to protect their values, and they would like to interpret the modern life in combine with their own authentic values. From a Muslim perspective, the life is something whole. You cannot retail it. So social life, political life cannot be
they are all integrated
separated
together, yes,
from each other. So therefore there is no political Islam in their mind. It is Islam for them.
But why do you think that nowadays, especially, as I keep on emphasizing, that Islam is always labeled with something like political Islam, radical Islam, moderate Islam? Who has the right to define Islam as such?
This is a Western approach which tends to categorize everything and specialize everything. In order to understand something, the Western mind prefers to categorize something. So it labels different groups in the Muslim world. This is also against Islamist movements, because especially the ones that I mentioned, which raised in the 1960s, Islamist movements attempted to create the whole Muslim world, one Muslim world. So in order to separate this whole world,
to divide this whole world, so that they can separate and rule.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Here, allow me, Dr. Suzanne, to ask you something. Who fuels the radical Islamist rhetoric, and why?
In fact, we have been observing Islam's transformation since the 1980s. and we can, this transformation is more towards to liberalization. I think it is the West fused this radical Islamism in
this kind of
order
discourse.
to, yes, it's a discourse in order to spoil this liberalization process of Muslim world. I mean, they need that a group. If you have an encounter, you can define yourself better. So this is artificially created in the West, I believe.
Right, we're going to stop now for a short break, and then when we come back, we will try to elaborate more on what is political Islam, right? A short break, and we'll be back. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Inside from Turkey. Welcome back, Dr. Suzanne. Now, in the course of our discussion, I want here to quote Dr. Francois Bourga in his book Islamism in the Shadow of Al-Qaeda, who says, quote, "The West misunderstand Middle Eastern political tensions by labeling everything Muslim as political Islam and failing to understand its own contribution to the situation." Here my question: how do you understand Middle Eastern politics? How does the West approach the Middle Eastern politics as an expert in East-West relations? And how did the West contribute to the tensions in the Middle East here?
I agree with the scholar. The West misunderstand politics in the Middle Eastern region because Islam is an element of life in Muslim societies. So you cannot separate Islam from Muslim politics. So I rather prefer to use Muslim politics rather than political Islam. If we say Muslim politics, then we put Muslim individual in the center. We should ask the question, who is speaking for Islam? The West, the religious scholars or politicians, or the modern Muslim. Today we see that there is the rise of modern Muslim individual. We can also see that in in the Arab Spring, the role of Muslim individual, their demands, and how politicians or religious scholars or the West or the local governments meet these demands. This is the point about Muslim politics today.
Now, allow me to ask you here a direct question. For how long will Arabs and Muslims pay this heavy price for the Western interventionist policies in the region? I mean, the West military interventions aimed at controlling the wealth under various excuses and headlines.
Especially the 20th century has been the colonization period of Muslim countries. So we suffered a lot during the 20th century by the Western intervention. I believe we are, as Muslims, we are quite different from Western societies in terms of organizing methods of our life. So this has been the very central question of Islamism also. How can a Muslim live in a modern world? Because our sources and approaches are very different from Western lifestyle.
Yes, but how do you see Turkey's position now and its relation? How is its image in the Arab world?
I think Turkey's impression is much better in the Middle East since the last decade under the leadership of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, because Turkey's image was very secular since the beginning of the modern foundation of the modern Turkey in the 1920s. But in the last decade, Turkey displays more Islamic sensible country.
Approach.
Yeah,
yes.
Approach. Of course, Palestine is a very sensitive issue for Muslims, and Turkey used to prefer more neutral approach before Erdogan towards Israel and Palestine. And it was close in the same distance to both countries, but it is different now, I believe. So this is important for Muslim countries, so its image is much better.
Yes, go ahead.
On the other hand, Turkey is pointed out like a role model for the other Muslim countries, but we rather prefer to use source of inspiration. Turkey can be source of inspiration rather than being a role model.
Right. With Europe steeply falling into an economic crisis, and we have all this kind of, excuse me, the upheaval in the Arab world, what is the role for the new Ottomans in the rapidly changing scene?
I'm against use the term of new Ottomans.
because you know, this is very widely commented at in the Turkish media nowadays. This is what we receive from your media outlets. They say that Mr. Erdogan is working on reviving the Ottoman Empire.
I don't agree in using the term new Ottomans, and Mr. Erdogan, I have never heard from him that he used this term. I think this is deliberately used by the Western media. Mr. Erdogan's Islamic sensible approach is misused by the Western media. The aim is to spoil its impact in the Muslim geography. I think in order to remind to Muslim minds their Ottoman past, they deliberately use this term. But what Erdogan trying to do is revitalize the Muslim world.
Right, but don't you think that the Muslim world?
The Muslim world, yeah.
But some say that the rise of Islamism or the Islamic movement in Turkey comes at a time to face as a Sunni Muslim country, just in face of a Muslim Shia country in Iran. This power in face of this power, just to strike a balance of forces. Do you agree?
There has always been rival between Iran and Turkey in Middle Eastern politics in history. This is not something new, like there is a rival between Shia and Sunni Islam in this land. This is about the political powers, I believe.
Now, according to Samih Hediz, who is a prominent journalist here, Turkish journalist, he said in March this year, in the meantime, the Erdogan government's approach to the Syrian crisis has also resulted in Turkey being increasingly accused of becoming part of the problem in Syria. How far is that true?
Especially recently, Turkish public criticize the government's policy towards Syria because In general, Turkish public believe that Syrian crisis is not a continuation of Arab Spring. It is, according to Turkish public, it is more about
a battle of powers,
destruction of resistance access in the region, like the
Hezbollah,
the line of Iran, Syria, and Lebanon, Hezbollah. This is the general public opinion now in Turkey. So Turkish public would like to see Turkish government to be more distance to the Syrian crisis recently.
Yes, because according also to the same author, he asks a very important question, because you know, when the foreign minister Ahmed Davutoglu, he came to office, he said that Turkey is attempting to have a zero problem policy with its neighbors, but now currently speaking, that Turkey not only end up with fewer friends in the Middle East than it started with, but also landed itself in a position where it is now accused of increasingly regional regional instability. The answer seems to lie in what might be termed the Islamization of the Turkish foreign policy.
This is not about the Islamization of Turkish policy, Turkish foreign policy at all. This is about the dynamism of Turkish foreign policy in the region. Because up until now, Turkey was more interested in being part of Europe and the West and the Western blocs like NATO, European Union, and other
Western blocs, yes,
associations. However, now Turkey would like to be more active in the Middle East. This is not because of Islamization. This is because to remember its origins and
its power
yeah.
back then, yes. Dr. Aisha Suzan, political scientist, expert in political Islam, and counselor at the Ministry of EU Affairs. Many thanks indeed for joining us on this interview from Istanbul.
I thank you.
You're most welcome, ma'am. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة، ودائما من الداخل. المزيد من التواصل theinside@almayadeen.net. إذا theinside@almayadeen.net من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من إسطنبول في تركيا. إلى اللقاء.